So according to a listing on a Swiss retailer called World of Games, which was spotted by this fine young gentleman, Liam Robertson, who's only about a 5 out of 10, sorry Liam, Battlefield 5 was pegged as a Mehrspieler-Taktik-Shooter im One Weltkrieg, or something. I don't care if I'm butchering your language. I like your cheese, though. Anyway, this means a multiplayer tactical shooter in World War I. Oh, fuck. This could either be really, really cool, or it could be absolute dog piss. I'm kind of conflicted about how I feel about a Battlefield that's set in World War I. I think there are positives, and I think that there are negatives to this. And honestly, right now, I think the negatives might outweigh the positives. At least from first impressions, and that's kind of what this is as I put this together. I want to go ahead and nip this in the bud right now because there's a very, very common thought when it comes to World War II. That guy's flying out of his thing. Anyway, there's this prevailing opinion out there amongst people that there was not a very large variety of weapons or equipment that was used in World War I. And this simply isn't true. Excellent and interesting and informative videos of a channel called Forgotten Weapons here on YouTube that there was a lot of innovation going on around this time period.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction House, and I have a cool surprise for you. It's a Burgess 12-gauge surprise. This is a Burgess 12-gauge pump-action folding shotgun.
Go check the channel out. I mean, look, he's not even wearing pants. Also, remember we talked about the Burgess shotgun for just a... Subscribe to him. I mean, look, he doesn't even have the amount of firearms that were used in the World War I, not just conflict, but during that era all across the world was extensive. The late 19th century and the early 20th century was a very, very interesting time period in the production and the invention and the development of firearms. Technology was barreling forward. And in warfare, people had to adjust to this new type of technology. People had to get used to the idea that you couldn't just form ranks in the middle of open fields and shoot at each other. That wasn't going to fly anymore. The world on the battlefield was changing. A single infantry soldier on the battlefield now had more power than he had ever had previously. Lever-action rifles, bolt-action rifles, semi-automatic self-loading rifles, all of these things were coming into the mainstream theater of the firearms world. There were many, many interesting developments, and a lot of those can be mirrored very, very effectively in a World War I game by DICE. For instance, go ahead and go to the Wikipedia page, literally called List of Infantry Weapons from World War I. Now, a lot of these are repeats, however, that's still a lot of weapons. There is everything here from handguns, to rifles, to machine guns, to shotguns, grenades, mortar, support guns, bayonets, and rocket-propelled dildo launchers. I went through a lot of these different weapons. Right-click, open a new tab. Right-click, open a new tab, like I was exploring the SCP Foundation website on a Monster Energy drink curiosity binge. There's some seriously cool shit in this list. Here's an improvised jam tin grenade made out of a condensed milk can. That was a thing. They used these. This was an actual thing. They killed people. This is the Beretta M1918. It loaded from the top because gravity. You also have some more notable examples like the Mauser C96 or the Red 9. By the way, these have some of the most complicated SBR laws possible according to a guy at the gun shop I go to. This is the Austrian Steyr Hahn M1912 pistol. It had a machine pistol version with an extended grip. I would love to see the Nagant 1895 revolver for two reasons. One, because, well, I own one. And two, because it can actually be suppressed. Oh, and of course, Mosin Nagants. And even in World War I, they had grenades that could be fired from rifles. And of course, you have shotguns like the Model 1897 trench gun. Though it didn't actually shoot these Dragonfire rounds in World War I, it was a competitor to the Burgess shotgun. But while we're on the subject, Killing Floor 2 also has some Remington 1858 revolvers. If DICE really wanted to stretch it, they could use Civil War era weaponry. I mean, it wouldn't be unbelievable. And that goes for things like lever-action rifles as well. Winchester made Russian lever-action rifles that fired the 7.62x54R cartridge. You know, the Mosin Nagant cartridge? That could be in the game. That's believable. There's plenty of rooms to have different types of weapons like we have now. Shotguns, DMRs, even sniper rifles. The thing is, though, that even though there is weapon variety in World War I that can be used for a video game, believably at least, the accessories and the attachments that you could use to customize those weapons would be much more limited. Optics technology was primitive compared to what it is now, and while there were scopes that were available during the Great War, red dot sights, no, that's not happening. You're going to be using iron sights almost all the time in this game. So that alone is going to reduce immensely the amount of variety that you could customize your weapons with. Maybe DICE could customize iron sights. Maybe we could choose between different styles of iron sights maybe in order to, I don't know, keep things fresh. Maybe they could have a peep sight that zooms in just a little and more open sights wouldn't give you any zoom at all. I don't know, just a thought. But as far as accessories would go, it would be a lot more of a old school Battlefield style where you wouldn't be able to customize the more intricate parts of the weapon like heavy barrels and suppressors with rare exceptions. Things like Picatinny rails and all that stuff, it wasn't standard for rifles. Rifles were out of the box what you were intended to use them as. Now, the lack of customization for weapons due to this time period's historical level of technology advancement, well, that's one thing, and I think DICE could get around that if they simply had a wide variety of weapons that behaved very differently. If every weapon that they put in really did feel unique and interesting and different, and if it filled its own special role in its own way, well, then I think we'd be able to, or at least a lot of us would, be able to look past the fact that customization of weapons would be severely limited based on what we have now. And the fact that weapons were what they were at this time, and the fact that accessories were what they were at this time, I think that would have some gameplay effects as well. Not just how you feel about playing, not just how you play personally, but how the battles actually turn out. When nobody, for the most part, is using optics on their rifles, when they don't have the ability to zoom in to see things or shoot things far away, then engagements are going to get closer and closer. And I think that would really lend well to this World War I atmosphere and, in effect, Battlefield. But I think that comes with a very interesting trade-off because almost all of these weapons have fairly limited capacities for rounds. The Red 9 holds 10. Most of these bolt-action rifles have 5. Even semi-automatic rifles, they don't get topped off at 30 or 20 like we see today. And revolvers, those are 5, 6, 7 round capacities each. That'll severely limit one soldier's ability to do damage over a wide scale. I mean, nowadays, 30 rounds, I mean, that could potentially put down 3, maybe even 4 people. If you're good enough, perhaps, the chance is there. And another interesting aspect about the way these guns were designed, there were very, very few magazine-fed weapons that were being used in the Great War extensively. They were almost all on stripper clips or rounds were loaded individually. And in the case of the Nagant revolver, each round had to be pushed out of the cylinder and then reinserted in one at a time. That was a lengthy process. The Remington 1858 revolvers, but those could be reloaded by replacing the entire cylinder, so it was much quicker. So the designs of the weapons of this time period were extremely varied, and while that's very interesting, it would also mean that there would be a very wide variety of reload times, and that would just be part of the aspect of balance that DICE would really have to get right. And that's ultimately what I think would really be cool about having World War I style weapons. There was such a huge variety in the styles and designs because people were still experimenting on what worked best, and technology was limited, but it was being pushed further and further. It would certainly have a less run-and-gun emphasis for World War I style play. And ultimately, I don't think that it's bad necessarily, but one of the things I really enjoy about Battlefield 4 is how it can be very fast-paced and frantic and a lot of the times chaotic. You were constantly shooting your automatic weapon at this guy, that guy. You were hopping behind cover. You were reloading, and bam, you got 30 more rounds to shoot. And I'm not going to say that I'm entirely excited about the idea that maybe that wouldn't happen, but it would certainly be something different that I'd be willing to try. And if it's done well, I can absolutely see that a World War I style shooter would be much more skill-based and obviously much less spray and pray like we see in games now. For instance, I see a lot of engagements in my head where one person shoots their rounds and then they run out and the other person shoots their rounds and now they're out of bullets, and now it's this frantic either choice to reload or run towards them and engage in melee combat. I think that would really lend well to the brutality of this kind of war. I mean, a lot of these weapons that I found, I mean, they were absolutely brutal. Some of the melee implements in this war were really kind of creepy. I mean, just the fact that a United States soldier was issued a knife that had brass knuckles attached to it because it was a realistic possibility that he might have to actually go up to someone and punch them in the face in a war. And that's not even going into bayonets, which were attached to rifles and shotguns and were a thing that was actually used in this war. I mean, in a multiplayer perspective, melee combat is going to have to be something that's addressed because it happened. Running into trenches, stabbing mofos. Having a charge like this be a realistic strategy that might have to be made by a player should they run out of bullets. And with guns like these, I'm saying it's going to happen quite a bit because of that limited round count and oftentimes slow reloading mechanics of these weapons. I really think that this game might have a bit of a different feel to it. The strategy and the formula, it can all come together. We can still have conquest game types which encourage the attack and not the defense. We could still have rush, which really encourage both. And in fact, I think that World War I would do a great deal to encourage people to play Rush, which is an excellent game mode that is not as quality stuff as it possibly could be in Battlefield 4. I want to see some Battlefield Bad Company 2 style Rush maps. I want to see maps that are designed for Rush. And in a World War I setting, that would be excellent. Looks like Team Rocket's blasting off again. Now, as for vehicles, there were vehicles of war in World War I. There were tanks, there were armored cars, there were biplanes, and they did things like bombing runs and reconnaissance. So you could absolutely have tanks and all this stuff in a World War I setting, though I wish, because I think it would lend better to the authenticity or the feel of the environments of a World War I shooter, that they would be less emphasized. It would be a mostly infantry business, and there would be some vehicles in it, but they wouldn't be as prevalent as they are in Battlefield now. Not only for just feel reasons, I think it would feel better in this kind of setting, but because the anti-tank capabilities are not what they are today. And the anti-aircraft capabilities, they're not what they are today either. They're completely different. Nowadays we have RPGs and Iglas and Stingers and lock on this and lock on that, and quite frankly, I'm sick to hell of all the lock-on stuff in Battlefield right now. But in World War I, if a tank was coming, you shot it with a big-ass fucking anti-tank cannon. These could be, just off the top of my head, balanced by having trails where the bullets are coming from. They could have limited damage against infantry so that they're encouraged to only be used against armor. They could have very slow projectiles with very heavy drops so that they take skill and aren't used to too easily eliminate air vehicles. Or they could simply have a very limited ammo capacity. Maybe they only do a certain amount of damage where you have more rounds, but they only do, 15 maybe a shot? Just a thought off the top of my head. I know the German army, in order to take out advancing tanks, they would use bundles of stick grenades that were bound together, and then they'd all blow up. So you could have anti-tank measures that were similar to the C4 used in Battlefield today. But you could absolutely have a vehicle warfare in World War I. It would look different, it would feel different, and hopefully they would emphasize the use of multi-person crews to operate tanks and such. Not one person drives and guns, you have a driver and you have a gunner, and they have to work together. Anyway, these are just some of my thoughts on World War I style Battlefield. Overall, I think it could be really, really good, but I mean, it's all down to execution. If it's not done in a good way, if it's not balanced out, if it doesn't have a lot of variety where there can absolutely be variety, then I think it could grow very stale very quickly. And they have to really make sure not to stray too far into the more methodical, tactical kind of shooter, because there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not really what Battlefield is now. And that's what a lot of people like. That's why a lot of people play it still. I mean, that's why I play it. And I don't have a problem playing a more slowed down and tactical sort of game, but I mean, you can go too far in either direction. Do I think they'll actually do it? No, I don't think they will. I think that they think that it's more of a niche market, and I understand why they would think that. But, hey, if it happens, it happens, and I'll absolutely be willing to see the silver linings in that sort of deal. Ow! I'm unstoppable!